Hello everybody, my name is Michael.
And my name is Donovan, and we just hosted the Great Migration and Helis and Heights trip.
It was a great trip, and if you'd like to hear about the updates from the Great Migration, stay tuned because Don will be tuning in.
And straight after that, Michael will talk about the Helis and Heights part in Lentori.
So Mike and I just returned from yet another amazing week in the Masai Mara. We had 4 guests with us in camp, and we decided to divide these guests into groups of 2, and 2 went in one vehicle and 2 in the other vehicle, and then Mike and I switched between the 2 vehicles each day, and oh, what an amazing time we had. Just our drive in from the airstrip to camp was super adventurous. As we arrived, Dixon and the team were ready to transfer us to the camp, and we saw 4 out of the big 5 just on that transfer. And as we got to camp, we decided the leopard that we saw on this drive would be worth following up on that afternoon. And we decided to leave camp slightly earlier. And as we got there, this leopard was not in this beautiful tree. It was sort of close to it, feeding on something. And we decided to just wait it out. And as we saw a storm approaching, we could realize that the light is going to be absolutely beautiful. And boy, did it pay off. I mean, the storm just rolled in, and we had this leopard, ascend on this tree, and it just chose the perfect branch to lay in. And what a memorable sighting that started out to be. And I mean, that was our first proper sighting of the trip. So we knew it was going to be a very good week after that. So basically, we were so fortunate, there's so many lions in that area, and where Wild Eyes Camp is situated is really in the heart of one particular pride of lions territory. And almost every morning as we left camp, we saw lions pretty early on. There was 1 or 2 mornings where it took us some time to find these lions, or when we found them, they were quite far off from the road. But there was also some other mornings where they were just walking on the road. And we could actually spend so much time with them and actually get really, really quality photos. So that was always a highlight to start the day in that way. And then in terms of the wildebeest, this was a bit of a tough one. There was only a few scattered herds in the triangle in the beginning, and then eventually they all moved out towards the Serengeti. But we at least got some decent images of these wildebeest and saw some of them, and there's lots of zebra. I actually think this last week there was more zebra than wildebeest in the triangle, which is quite unusual, but spectacular to see. And we also from there had a few funny moments in terms of wildlife. This particular one is this lioness that was actually a younger lioness. In this pride, they were busy walking in a certain direction, and this one just saw this bush and decided that it was going to play with this bush and jumped up and actually fell over on her back. And we all had quite a big chuckle when this sort of happened. But then from there, I mean, it was spectacular to see them move, and we looped around, and we actually could follow these lions for quite some time. Actually, I think a lot of this trip has been, focused around lions. There were so many lions around, so we spent some quality time with them, which was special. And then on this one afternoon, we decided to again look for the lions we saw in the morning, but we didn't want to go straight there, because it was still quite hot. So we decided to take a bit of a detour and drive nice and slow and see what else we can see and photograph. And the next thing, we came around this beautiful group of elephants. And we decided to just, enjoy them. The light wasn't particularly good, and there wasn't necessarily a good photo out there, but we just decided to watch these elephants. And eventually, these 2 young male elephants decided to have a bit of a tussle. All just friendly, like typical brothers, just, pushing each other around and all of that. But I mean, it made for such a beautiful scene. What's difficult to see in a video is, the surrounding and how beautiful and peaceful it was. And I think for a lot of our guests, especially for Jules that sat next to me and actually enjoyed that sighting with me, Jules and Rudolph, we really was we were in awe of these amazing creatures and how beautiful that sighting was in that moment. And it wasn't always just about the the big animals. We also focused quite a bit on of birds. For those people that know me, I've got a really big passion for birding, and all the guests that was on my vehicle all of the times, we actually did also look a bit for birds and see if there was nice photographic opportunities of birds. And I mean, we had this one rufous necked lock, which isn't necessarily a particularly beautiful bird, but it was displaying and calling so beautifully. So we decided to take a video of this bird. I mean, just look at how beautiful, listen to how beautiful this bird's song is. And then what really happened is, I didn't personally see this, but this is what Mike told me that they saw, and he's actually the following videos also from him. But they stopped at this waterhole actually just to photograph a lily, and as they got there, they saw this one Egyptian goose looking a bit on edge, and the next thing, this massive python caught an Egyptian geese, and was busy killing it. And they actually saw all of this happen, and up until the moment that it actually pulled this Egyptian goose out of the water. But I mean, you can see how the other Egyptian goose was so upset. You know, obviously the partner of that goose that got killed was so upset, and all the other birds in that area were all super alarmed with this massive python being in the water close to them. And it shows you that sometimes it's really worth stopping for smaller things, and you can have incredible sightings like that. You just never know what's around the corner or laying in the water, for example. So also a really, really big highlight that for the week. And this is the sighting, and I kept it for last because this was the sighting that really, it was behavior that I personally have never seen, and none of the guests that were in our group has seen this before either. And this was that same morning when that lion played with that bush and then fell on its back. Those lions eventually walked like over a ridge, and we decided to loop around, but quite far ahead. And the next thing, we randomly found this beautiful female with 4 between 6 and 8 week old cubs, and we think she was in the process of actually moving a den site. So she got onto this mound, and we saw that she kept on looking back, but didn't really think much of it at the time. And then the next thing, the pride that we saw and followed earlier actually then joined up with this female. Luckily, she was part of that same pride, because otherwise the sighting could have panned out a bit differently and more sad, because then those cubs would have been killed. But luckily it was part of the same pride. But those cubs were way too young to be introduced to the pride. So you could see, like in that sighting, how this female was really in stress, knowing that these cubs, and there were some sub-adults in that pride, would really be playing quite rough and hard with these youngsters. So the mother actually tried to, get away from this pride and lead her cubs away. And every time a lion or another adult or sub-adult lion got close to her cubs, she would actually chase them away. So that was such a spectacular sighting. And eventually she kept on walking back to this lager or drainage line to try and, I think, stash away these cubs. But she didn't want to let the rest of the pride know where she wants to stash them. So she was continuously trying to walk away from them. And then the next thing, one of the lionesses, so not the mother, one of the other ones, they saw a leopard and actually then ran in the direction of this leopard to chase it. Unfortunately, we couldn't quite photograph that because it was behind a few trees and quite far off in the distance. But that gave the mother the opportunity to take her cubs away where the pride didn't see where they were going. So again, such spectacular behavior. And the thing is, when you go out on each game drive, you just never know what you're going to see. And that was just evidence of that. As we got out, I mean, we really didn't expect to come across this lioness moving den site with her cubs, and then that lioness stumbles upon her pride, and now her pride has seen her cubs, and the pride is super eager to get introduced to these cubs, but they were going to play way too rough. So that interaction was such a special thing. So I mean, we've seen lions so many times in our lives, but even then you get to see behavior that you've never seen before, and that's what's so amazing about going on a safari. But yeah, so that was the biggest highlights from our week in the Mara, and from there, Mike and the 4 guests continued on to Lentori to spend some time in the hide. But let me not tell you all the highlights of that few days. That will be Mike.
Lentori is always a very special place to visit. The this was my third visit to the area, and it always seems to blow my socks off in one way or another. Now, this year was slightly different, a different experience all round. Reason being is there was some pretty heavy rains about a week and a half prior to our arrival. Now, this is a very arid, dry area, the South Rift Valley, and so animals are drawn to water sources. There is a river that runs through the area, and usually kind of around the peak migration season, this area and the river is somewhat drier. Now, with the amount of rain that had fallen, animal movements obviously changed somewhat. They weren't drawn and pulled into the water hole that is in front of the hide at Lentori, because there was water readily available elsewhere. But that being said, it was still an incredible experience. And despite the water and the amount of rain, we had a bit of rain while we were there. We still had a few cool critters coming in towards the hide. Now, I'm going to break it up. I'll start off with the hide and then move off onto the helicopter flights. Now, a typical day there is an early dinner into the hide by just after 5 at 5:30. Dinner's at 5. And then you sit in the hide the whole evening. And throughout our time in the hide, on average, we were leaving the hide at about 7 every morning and making our way up for breakfast. Now, during our time there, as I'd mentioned, animal movements were pretty few and far between when it came to the hide. We had some really good bird life. In the evenings, we had a great heron that, when I say great, I mean little egret, that came in, but it was a great sighting and moment. We had that particular bird, I think, twice in the evenings. We had some owlets, pearl-spotted owlets, sitting up in trees and all around us. And then obviously the early mornings, when the birds, as the sun was rising, came in for their first drink of the morning, had a bit of a bird bath, and obviously had our resident hammerkop that were quite pestly in the evenings and early in the mornings, walking up and down the glass, jumping up on the glass, spraying water all over the glass, and affecting that experience somewhat. But the great thing is I have the WhatsApp numbers of our guide, Joel, and there's Wi-Fi down in the hide, so I could text him and say, hey, listen, the birds have messed up the window. Please send someone down to come and clean it. So we had a cleaning crew on duty 24/7, which was great. The one evening it was raining, our last night, and the rain obviously also dirtied up the window and the glass that you look through, and we just simply sent a message and the team came in and cleaned it. But that being said, we had really good bird life in and around the hide this time, and in terms of larger species, we had a few antelope coming through, quite a few impala, waterbuck that came in for a drink. We also had a pair of dik that came in for a drink, which was very special. But they seemed very nervous. They kind of scattered pretty quickly, came in for a drink and moved. There were lions not far from the area. They were calling every night, but sadly, with the river that was flowing there, they were probably getting their drink full over there. Maybe they had a big kill somewhere and didn't need to really come in for water, getting enough moisture from the animals that they've hunted. So yeah, a bit of a nervous, kind of twitchy behavior from these prey species that came in to drink. There was also a lot of striped hyena movement, which was such a frustration. Walk past the hide 2, sometimes 3 times a night, but just beyond the reach of our cameras in that low light. We could see him with a bare eye moving through and to and from. But sadly, he didn't come up, but he was around, and we did at least get to see him with our eyes. But then in terms of small predators, we had a really cool sighting of a small spotted genet the one evening. Well, actually, we had 2 white-tailed mongoose that we were woken up for. There's a night watch in the hide, so when you go down to sleep at a point in the evening, the night watch comes in, and then if anything exciting comes into the water, he'll come and wake you up and say, hey, there's something here. So we were woken up for these 2 white-tailed mongoose. We were photographing them, and eventually they kind of moved off. And I had suddenly woken up, and I looked up into the tree, and I was like, there's a genet up there, which the night watch, maybe he was having a nap himself, didn't see the genet go up. But then we got to enjoy a sighting of this genet in this tree. It then did different little poses within the tree, came out and marked on the side of it before it moved off, which was a really pretty scene, and very nice to see. We had some dwarf mongoose early one afternoon, and it's, I think, the closest I've ever been to a dwarf mongoose. I don't even think I've ever seen a dwarf mongoose tongue in my life, or that close at least in my life, but that was a really cool sighting. It was like right up close to my side of the hide. I control the lights in the hide because you get 4 front-facing lights and then back-end side lights that I control throughout the evening, but very cool to see that early one afternoon. And then in terms of cats, we only got to see one cat species while we were in the hide, and that was a caracal. And we got to see a caracal on 2 occasions. The one being not as skittish and kind of just kept its head down and drank, so no real backlight or sidelight opportunities. It just drank, got up and moved away immediately. Whereas the second guy that came in, I think it was the following night or the night thereafter, came in, had a drink, but it was super nervous. It took a long time to come in. It was like kind of creeping in slowly. Eventually got to the water's edge, and when it did, it was kind of always up, looking around, and very nervous. And this gave us good opportunity to play with side and back lighting and create some really cool and moody looking images. We also had a jackal that pulled into the hide a number of times for a drink, but also very skittish. And I'm pretty sure that there was big lion movement in that, or to that hide, for about a month prior to us arriving. There was a lot of lion activity at that waterhole, various different prides, different males, and so I think the presence of these bigger predators was still very much noticeable around that hide, which made all the other animals a little bit wary and a little bit nervous to approach and to come actually drop their guard and put their head down to drink. But nonetheless, it was still a really good 4 nights in the hide. Really enjoyed it. And as I'd mentioned, an early dinner, whole night in the hide, broken sleep, out for breakfast at 7. And then typically the rest of that day is a bit of siesta before helicopter flights later on in the day. Now, we didn't do helicopter flights every day. We had 2 days of helicopter flying, but we were there for 5 days. So, as I said, into the hide early. The first morning out, we just had at leisure, relaxed, had a lunch, and then we had a presentation by an organization called Soralo, who are fighting really hard and doing a great job in finding a balance between, or a harmony between wildlife and livestock, kind of living in harmony and in peace, and they're doing a really good job involving the communities, spread between from the South Rift Valley all the way through to, or like a corridor between Amboseli and the Mara. It's this massive strip, so they're doing a phenomenal job at that, and we got to enjoy and ask many questions and really get a better understanding as to how they're managing this human-wildlife conflict in the area. And then thereafter, a lunch or a dinner, and back into the hide. The next day was our first helicopter flight, which was really, this was the highlight of our time there, is we got to enjoy, or guests, the 4 guests got to enjoy 2 hours each, flying over Lake Magadi and or Lake Natron. Now our plan was, because the guests' big goal here was flamingo with patterns in the water, and conditions-wise we were quite nervous. It was still quite cloudy, it wasn't all too hot, so we weren't all too optimistic about the pattern possibilities due to the conditions. But our pilot came in, he had lunch with us, we discussed plans. We obviously, with the guests, had discussed plans prior to the pilot's arrival. But our first flight took us up and took off right out at the lodge itself. There's a helipad there, and we made our way straight to Lake Magadi, where we were pleasantly surprised. There were quite a few pattern formations on both the north and south side of the lake. But what really blew my mind is that the whole section, that whole middle section between the north and the southern tips of the lake, there was this massive, deep, dark red crust of salted patterns that had formed, which I've only seen a small patch of that many years ago, and to have seen so much of that red crystal build-up that solidified was just really, really pretty, and something that was a highlight to all of us. We really enjoyed spending time over that. We had big hopes of having birds flying over there, which unfortunately didn't happen. But speaking of birds, we had incredible birds both in the north and the south of Lake Magadi. In both areas we had really cool looking patterns as well, over which we had either birds flying, birds sitting next to, no birds at all, because sometimes photographing just the patterns is more than enough. But what really caught me by surprise is the sheer amount of bird that were actually in Lake Magadi at the time. In my past years, we've had a few birds in Lake Magadi. Most of them would sit in Lake Natron. But this time we had a lot of birds, both in the north and south of Magadi. And it just gave us beautiful opportunities to photograph these birds. I think it's hands down probably my best bird with patterns kind of experience I've ever had in helicopters in that area. So really, really fun time out there with the birds. And as I'd mentioned, we spend most of our time over Lake Magadi, and only on one of the flights halfway through did the guests on board, because we've got headsets and microphones, we can still communicate with each other, did we decide to, well, let's go see Lake Natron. And this is where the lesser flamingo nest. They are actually the largest flock of East African flamingo, breeding flamingo, are found in these two lakes at Lake Natron and Magadi, but the nesting and so on happens at Lake Natron. Now, we were approaching then in our discussions, we had said, look, there's no possibility of patterns in Lake Natron. It's a much bigger, deeper lake, but there are loads of birds. And yet again, pleasantly surprised, as soon as we approached this lake, the shoreline was just pink, covered in flamingo, and there was a massive long straight pattern with a few twirls kind of spreading around that coastline. And we had, I don't even know how many birds there were. There were many, many, many birds. And it was something to see, because we flew quite high. We were right up close to the mountain range, and it's just a very, you can say picturesque scene, but a tough one to photograph because there's just so many birds. But it was just an absolutely incredible experience. One of the guests on board was in tears, full of joy and so happy, having experienced not only the whole entire flight, but just a different route and flying close to the mountains. And what she said is very true. It makes you feel so tiny in this massive world. So a really cool experience flying above and around Lake Natron. It's a lake that we don't really often visit because we want the patterns. But this time around, we were very fortunate to have really good pattern activity, and then this gave us some time to shoot over to Natron and experience that as well, which the guests thoroughly enjoyed. There's beautiful delta patterns, and it's a stunning part. So if you are joining us there next year, or looking at joining a trip to the South Rift Valley in the future, I would highly recommend trying to visit Natron as well as Lake Magadi. And like I said, the helipad's right at the lodge, so it's so convenient, so perfect, and it gives you time to experience other things within the camp as well. Because, as mentioned, we have pretty sleepless nights in the hide. You're often waking up, sleeping lightly, to be ready for whatever comes into the hide. But then during the day, if you've got the energy or you had a good night's sleep and you've got some time, we also utilized, because we had 2 nights or so with some really good sleep where the hide was fairly quiet, and we were only woken up once or twice, we utilized their 2 bird hides, which is higher up. So the hide itself, the main hide, is you walk all the way down in this big tunnel to get to eye level, and the water right down below the hillside on which the lodge is built. But then they've got 2 bird hides, a morning hide and an evening hide, due to light, but we utilized both of them throughout the day. We had some really fun moments there with many, many bird species that came in for a drink, a bath, and a feed. and also vivid monkeys. They in and around the camp the whole time. So we had a fun time there. And let's not forget about the village visit that we got to enjoy, spending a day or a morning with a local Maasai village, which is by no means commercialized, and you get to see how they live their life and prep for their day early in the morning just before they release their livestock. So very interesting, and the four guests really had an incredible time, and it ties so perfectly with week in the Masai Mara. So all round a really enjoyable trip, a very successful trip, and I know that despite the hide being somewhat quieter, I know that we've all come home with a big bank of really good and top quality imagery. I've seen a few of the guests' images throughout the trip. They were kind enough to share some with me and show me some of the work that they managed to create out there, and there is some really, really, really good stuff that came out of it. So I'm very pleased with how everything panned out, and I look forward to getting back there next year. I'll be back there in September again, and if you are interested in looking into a trip into the South Rift Valley and combining that with a week in the Masai Mara to try and target the Great Migration, please feel free to get in touch. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this part of the Strip Report.